Richard Hayes humiliated the intern, tore up his resume, and kicked him out of the office. To him, the guy was a nobody. But the next day, that nobody was sitting at the head of the table. "I am now the owner of the company, Mr. Hayes." Richard was stunned. And then, the thing he feared most happened. Richard Hayes, the CEO of a major corporation, was a man of legend, and not in a good way. He believed discipline was built on fear and authority on crushing others. Employees in his company trembled before stepping into his office, and whispers of someone's dismissal spread faster than the latest financial reports. He tolerated neither mistakes nor weakness. Today was one of the most important days of his career. Investors, ready to pour millions into the company if the presentation went smoothly, had gathered in the conference room. A massive screen, dimmed lights, rows of expensive suits. The atmosphere was set for sealing the deal. But the moment Richard clicked the remote, the screen went black. Silence. He clicked again. Nothing. "What the hell?" he hissed through clenched teeth, scanning the room. One of the assistants nervously stepped forward. "It's a projector issue, sir. The tech team is already—" "Who's responsible for setting it up?" His voice was razor sharp. All eyes landed on an intern, a tall young man with messy blonde hair. He froze like a deer caught in headlights. "Was it you?" Richard narrowed his eyes. "Are you responsible for this?" Jason Myers swallowed hard, his face reddening as he tried to speak, but he never got the chance. "Are you serious?" Hayes roared, making him flinch. "You can't even handle basic tech? Maybe you should be fetching coffee instead of working in my company." A suffocating silence fell over the room. Jason stared at the floor, his fists clenching involuntarily. "You're useless." Richard snatched the intern's resume from the table, crumpled it, and dramatically tore it in half. "People like you destroy companies, not build them." He tossed the shredded paper onto the floor. "Get out of my office!" Jason didn't move. "I said, get out!" Slowly, the young man turned around and walked out without a word. The air in the room was thick with tension. The investors exchanged glances. Some looked puzzled, others disappointed, but no one spoke. Acting as if nothing had happened, Richard turned back to the screen, clenching his fists. "Interns. Worthless trash," he thought with irritation. He had no idea what kind of disaster he had just brought upon himself. The next day, Richard Hayes was on edge. Yesterday's incident with the intern had already slipped from his mind. After all, how many incompetent employees had he thrown out before? But today, there was something far more important at stake. He was about to meet the new owner of the company. The deal had been negotiated in the utmost secrecy, but now everything was settled. The shares were sold, leadership had changed, and an unknown investor had officially become the corporation's owner. Who is he? Richard wondered, sitting in his office. Most likely some billionaire, ruthless, cold, and smug, just like himself. Maybe a member of an influential family or a financier used to getting everything handed to him on a silver platter. Perfect. I'll find common ground with him, Hayes thought confidently as he rose from his chair. When the clock struck 11 unquack, he strode purposefully toward the conference room. The doors opened. He took a few steps inside and froze. Sitting at the long glass table was that same guy, the intern, Jason Myers. The silence in the room was deafening. Richard blinked as if hoping he was imagining things. "What the hell?" His voice broke into a growl. Jason met his gaze calmly. This time, there wasn't a trace of nervousness in his expression. On the contrary, a faint, almost amused smile played on his lips. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes." He folded his hands on the table. "My name is Jason Myers. I am now the owner of the company." Richard felt the blood freeze in his veins. Just seconds ago, he had been the master of this room, this building, this business. And now, everything had changed. Richard's entire body tensed, his face flushed with rage. He shot up from his chair so abruptly that it nearly toppled over. "This must be some kind of mistake," he bellowed, his voice thundering through the room. "Some intern can't own a corporation." The veins in his neck bulged, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He glared at Jason with pure hatred, like a predator backed into a corner. But Jason remained perfectly calm. He didn't flinch, didn't waver. Instead, he lazily leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms over his chest, and looked at Richard with something close to amusement. "Funny that you think so," he said, his voice cold and composed. "I'm not just an intern. I am the heir to Myers Group, the holding company that acquired your corporation." Richard felt like he had been punched in the chest. Myers Group, one of the most powerful financial conglomerates in the country. If they had bought his company, this wasn't an accident. This was a trap. "I wanted to see how your leadership truly operated," Jason continued, dragging out each word deliberately. "And I must say I was impressed by just how toxic you are." Richard's fists tightened, his insides boiled with fury. "You have no right to do this to me." He slammed his fist onto the table. "I've worked here for 15 years. Jason tilted his head slightly, studying him like a lab experiment. "And for 15 years you've humiliated people." His voice was eerily calm, yet carried an icy sharpness. "Funny how the tables turn, isn't it?" Silence swallowed the room once more. A cold sweat trickled down Richard's back. He had lost. But he wasn't going down without a fight. A menacing silence filled the room. Richard stood there, breathing heavily, his hands trembling with rage and helplessness. Just yesterday, he had ruled this company, a man who made employees quake in fear. But today, his fate rested in the hands of yesterday's intern. Jason slowly rose to his feet. He didn't rush, didn't make any sudden movements. Instead, his every action was measured, exuding a calm confidence that only heightened the tension. He took a few steps forward and stopped right in front of Richard, looking him straight in the eye. "You're fired." A simple phrase, cold, steady, final. Richard instinctively stepped back as if he had been struck in the chest. You can't." His voice wavered. Jason smiled. "I can." Richard felt the ground slipping from beneath him. This was the end. But he couldn't. He couldn't just disappear like this. His fists clenched as his mind raced, desperately searching for an escape. "But what about my reputation?" His voice had lost its authority, now laced with something dangerously close to pleading. "What will people say about me?" Jason slowly tilted his head to the side. "They'll say justice was served." Simple words, but they sent a chill down Richard's spine. It was over. He wanted to say something, wanted to spit out one last biting remark, but the words caught in his throat. Without another word, he turned and walked out. As he moved through the hallway, he could feel the eyes of the employees on him. Some smirked discreetly, others looked shocked, but not a single person felt sorry for him. His world had crumbled. Meanwhile, back in the boardroom, Jason sat down at the head of the table, calmly opened his laptop. A new era had begun. An era where people were treated with respect,